President Trump campaigns in the Dakotas today, and it's a safe bet we're going to hear more attacks on the anonymous member of an alleged resistance within his administration. The president slammed the person who wrote a New York Times article during a rally in Montana last night. He called the author gutless and said it was a threat to the country. At least 28 officials, including the vice president, the first lady, and members of the cabinet, have denied they wrote that op-ed. It's hardly the first search for a high-profile anonymous official in Washington. A 1974 Wall Street Journal article detailed the hunt for Deep Throat, the source who provided information about the Watergate scandal.
The paper wrote, Mark Felt says he isn't now, nor has he ever been, Deep Throat. In 1974, Felt told the Journal, I'm just not that kind of person. The former top FBI official revealed he was Deep Throat in 2005.
USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page joins us now. Good morning, Susan.
Hey, good morning, John.
So you think not one, but two possible constitutional crises may be in the offing here. Why is that?
Well, I think we have this portrait from the New York Times op-ed, from the Bob Woodward book, and from just the daily news coverage of this White House of a president who is erratic, who is mercurial, who even his own staff doesn't trust. That raises questions about his fitness for office. But you also have the picture of what Bob Woodward calls an administrative coup d'etat of unelected, unaccountable officials countermanding, undermining some of the decisions made by the duly elected president. Now, which constitutional crisis you worry about more probably depends on what you think about President Trump.
Go ahead. How, Susan, how do you run a railroad when this is going on? I mean, what does this do to the process of, if it's already chaotic inside, and there's been a lot of reporting about that, how do things change now?
You know, I don't think our railroad is running very smoothly down a track at the moment. We have a town, a capital that is pretty much transfixed by controversies, daily controversies over the White House and the president. It's really an extraordinary situation when you have the vice president and almost every member of the cabinet feeling compelled to issue denials that they portrayed the president as of someone who was unfit to serve. That's just extraordinary.
And Susan, listen, I have a couple of questions. Can you imagine any scenario that anybody steps forward and says, yep, it was me? That's number one. Number two, how does a White House team function when there's such a lack of trust amongst itself? How do you see that working? How do you see that working?
The White House staff has some loyalists to the president trust, but it is not, in fact, a White House staff that works in the traditional way of earlier White Houses. There is not a lot of trust. And I've got to say, the events of just the past couple days is likely to erode whatever trust there has been on the White House staff, and it's particularly with the president and his sense of faith that those around him are not leaking negative stories about him. That's got to be tough.
And Susan, you know, there's an erosion of trust in our industry as well as journalists. A big debate as to whether the New York Times should have printed this anonymous op-ed at all. How soon do you expect that we will find out who the author was, and how much pressure is on the New York Times to up the ante and make sure that this really was a high-level official?
So again, this depends on where you stand. People who have trust in the New York Times, I think, believe that they wouldn't have described this person as a senior administration official if he or she had not been that. But we've seen this great erosion, as you say, in the news media. And one of the things that contributes to the current state of turmoil across the country is that I think a lot of Americans just don't know who to trust. They don't know who to believe when these controversies come up.
And meanwhile, finally, Susan, the president's nominee for the Supreme Court seems to be going through that process on his way to perhaps a successful result. When you step back and look at it, despite the turmoil, the president and his party are getting what they want.
And, you know, you may worry about whether the government is functional, but whatever happens with President Trump, he could be impeached tomorrow. His impact on this nation is going to be set in a big way, assuming he wins this second confirmation for the Supreme Court and to the seat that has been the swing vote.
All right, Susan Page, thank you very much. Always good to see you.
Thank you.